The cold did not come suddenly. It never does. It crept across the land in quiet increments, like frost forming across a still pond. Silent and steady, too slow for a single pair of eyes to notice. The world changed breath by breath, degree by degree. First, the winds shifted, a little colder, a little drier. Then the seasons stretched, summers shorter, winters longer, until the earth began to wear a coat it would not take off for thousands of years. And so the Ice Age began, not with a crash, not with calamity, but with a whisper. Snow that once melted at spring's first sigh lingered now into summer, layering upon itself, pressing down, compressing into ice, thick, heavy ice that did not leave, a creeping, living weight that thickened year upon year. It began in the high latitudes, where the sun's arc grew low and tired. Then the white spread outward like paint spilling over a canvas, inching across continents, unstoppable. It was not a wall, it was a tide. The glaciers came down like slow breath, breathing in, holding, breathing in again, each exhale taking millennia. The cold did not crash, it settled, it held, and once it held, it did not let go. Beneath this frozen breath, the shape of the world was undone. Rivers were stopped in their paths, redirected by walls of ice taller than mountains. Hills were ground to dust. Valleys deepened. Earth groaned beneath the weight, sinking under the mass of frozen time. Forests disappeared. Grasslands blinked into white silence. Oceans receded as water became sky, and sky became snow, and snow became ice. The sea crept back from the shores, and new lands were born, bridges of earth where none had been before. To walk the land now was to walk a world half remembered, a world rewritten by cold. But the world was not empty. No, it was alive. The cold did not kill everything. Life, stubborn as ever, endured. It adapted. It changed shape, color, coat, instinct. Fur thickened, noses shortened, eyes widened to catch the low light. Those who couldn't adapt moved or vanished, and those who stayed, they became legends. The mammoth, taller than a house, cloaked in hair as thick as dreams. The woolly rhinoceros, massive, solitary, with breath like steam engines in the silence. The cave lion, silent and golden. The dire wolf, lean and strong, eyes glinting like flint. Even Max, the little Arctic fox, fast, clever, wrapped in white and gray, danced across the ice on paws built for silence. They were not monsters, they were miracles, the shaped children of ice and time. And above them all, the sky, endless, clean, quiet, blue in the day, white with storm, black with stars. The stars seemed closer then, brighter, as if the cold made them clearer, as if the sky remembered what it was before the heat, before the lights of cities chased it into memory. Under that old sky, everything felt ancient. The light, the ice, the silence. Even the wind had a voice, soft but constant. It hummed through the trees that still stood. It whispered across plains of frozen grass, painting frost in its wake. It rustled Max's fur as he tucked himself behind a rock, his ears twitching at distant movement. Max knew these lands. His body knew them before thought could form. His ancestors had run across the same cold crust, hunted the same mice beneath snow, listened to the same howls in the night. The ice had carved this memory into his blood, but he was not alone. Nothing was alone. Tracks crossed tracks in the snow, a story written with each step. The curve of a mammoth herd, the long dragging path of a bear, the dance of hare and lynx, the silent print of an owl's wings brushing snow. This was a world of motion, slow, careful, essential. Movement was survival. Stillness was death. And so life moved. It huddled in caves, in tunnels beneath the frost, in warm hollows of bone and moss. It moved in herds, in pairs, in solitary paths etched across white plains. It moved not for comfort, but for continuation. Even the humans. Yes, we were there too. Not many, just enough. We were not kings, not yet. We were clever, yes, but not dominant. We had fire, but it flickered. We had tools, but they broke. We had stories, though, that we had, and we had each other, bundled in fur, wrapped in hide, watching the stars by firelight, and wondering if the sun would return. We carved memories into walls, painted the beasts we hunted and the beasts we feared. We shaped spears from stone and dreams from ash. We followed the herds, made homes from bones, and shared warmth in the dark. And we listened to the wind, to the silence, to Max's quiet footsteps across the snow, always just beyond the firelight. In the hush between snowflakes, the world waited for warmth, for return, for the next breath in the glacier's lungs. But warmth would not come for tens of thousands of years, because this was not a season, this was an epoch. The Pleistocene, the long cold. The memory of this age still lingers, in the bones of mountains, in the softness of northern soil, in the shape of our dreams. Glaciers may have melted, but their weight remains. The land rises slowly, still unburdening itself. The earth remembers. We remember, in ways we don't always see. Max still runs through our stories. The mammoth still walks in our myths. The stars still shine as they did when our ancestors looked up and whispered to each other, "Tomorrow, we move." The cold does not come suddenly. It comes quietly, deeply. It takes hold, and in that stillness, something else arises. Wonder. The glacier did not march like an army. It drifted, settled, pressed. It was not war. It was presence, a presence so vast that it shaped the land by simply existing. Mountains were smoothed, valleys were carved, entire rivers were swallowed, turned to memory under miles of silent ice. The weight of it bent the earth's crust itself, pushing it down like a hand pressing gently but relentlessly into clay. And still, the glacier moved, each inch forward, measured in centuries. Its breath was mist, its voice was silence, its shadow cold enough to stop time. It did not know of borders or names or nations. It simply existed, indifferent, enormous, alive in its slowness. Where it passed, nothing remained the same. Where it stayed, life adapted or vanished. Above it all, the air changed. It grew thinner, drier. Dust rode the wind. Clouds changed shape. Sunlight bent differently through the sky. The earth tilted on its axis, danced slowly in and out of cycles, eccentricity, obliquity, precession, the clockwork of ice ages, written not in hours or seasons, but in tens of thousands of years. The Milankovitch cycles, the pulse of the planet, a rhythm we did not hear but always felt. And beneath that rhythm, life continued. It always does. The mammoths moved in great herds, their tusks, like ivory crescents against the wind, swaying as they walked, each footstep a small defiance of the cold. Their young stayed close, shielded by fur and family. They dug through snow with their trunks, searching for grass locked beneath winter's skin. Their calls echoed across the steppe, low and mournful, speaking of roots remembered, dangers sensed, storms coming. The wolves followed, always watching, always near. Their packs a balance of hunger and patience. They ran across crusted snow with ease, tongues lolling, breath steaming like smoke. Their howls were not songs of loneliness, they were maps, coordinates, a code only they could read. And Max watched them, always from a distance, always curious. He was a quiet shadow in a world of giants, small enough to hide in the snow's folds, clever enough to survive where strength was useless. His ears twitched at every gust. His nose was a compass. He moved in loops, figure eights, backtracks, patterns designed to confuse anyone who might follow. A snow dancer, a whisper of fur and instinct. Max knew the herds, knew the hunters, knew the smell of warmth under snow, a vole tunnel, a buried nest, a forgotten scrap. He knew how to curl his tail over his nose at night, and how to dig a quick den when the wind turned cruel. He did not need fire. He needed silence, and silence was abundant. The Ice Age was not loud. It was not a storm. It was a hush, a deep, ongoing hush. Even the storms came with soft sounds, snow falling on snow, the creak of frozen branches, the groan of distant ice. The loudest sound was often the breath of a creature, a sudden exhale, a snort, a cry, or the crack of something shifting deep within the glacier, a sound like thunder buried under miles of stone. Humans had learned to listen. They had no choice. We followed the herds, yes, but more than that, we followed the signs. A bend in a river meant shelter. The lean of a tree meant wind. The tracks of Max, tiny, sharp, purposeful, might mean the presence of mice, which meant food, which meant survival. We did not dominate this world, not yet. We existed within it, part of the chain, not the top. We built shelters from mammoth ribs, covered them in hides, sealed them with mud and moss. Fire was not a luxury, it was life. Fire for warmth, fire for light. Fire to keep the dark at bay, not just from animals, but from the fear that crept in with the wind. Inside those shelters, we told stories. Stories of hunts and losses, of stars and spirits, of Max, not by name, not exactly, but as a trickster spirit, a survivor, a guide, the fox who never starved, the one who always found his way home. His image scratched into stone, painted onto bone, danced in shadows cast by firelight on walls of cold rock. Children fell asleep to his tales. Warriors envied his instincts. Old ones nodded at his wisdom. Max was not a pet, not a god. He was a reminder that life did not always mean strength, that sometimes it meant knowing when to move, when to wait, when to vanish. Outside, the glacier loomed. It was always there, a pale horizon, a slow sigh of pressure against the world's chest. Even when not seen, it was felt. The ground trembled faintly under its weight. Water ran in strange patterns, carving melt tunnels beneath it. Whole lakes vanished into its belly, hidden for millennia, only to emerge again centuries later, reshaped. Sometimes the sky turned strange, red with dust, pale with snow, dark with clouds that never rained. The sun could shine bright and still give no warmth. The moon hung low, swollen with ice breath, its face sharp and watching. Stars shimmered like frost, and the land, it was a patchwork of contradictions. Where the glacier did not touch, vast plains stretched cold deserts, rich with life. The steppe, the mammoth steppe, endless grass, wind scoured and dry, tougher than any blade. It fed herds, herds fed wolves, wolves fed Max. It fed us too. We made use of every part, the hide for tents, the fat for lamps, the bones for tools. Nothing wasted. Waste was death. Gratitude was instinct. We spoke to the beasts we killed, whispered to the wind, marked the passing of seasons, not with calendars, but with migration and birth and thaw. And still, we listened. We heard the glacier breathing. We heard Max barking in the distance. We heard the sky cracking in the dead of winter, that sharp sound like splitting stone. We heard the silence that followed, a silence that meant something, because silence was never empty. Not here, not now. Max paused, his breath clouding in the air. His ears caught something far off, a groan from the north, a sound older than language. He knew what it meant, a crack deep in the glacier, a shift, a movement that would take years to finish, but had begun already. He blinked, sniffed the wind, and moved on. We too sensed it. Not with ears or eyes, but with memory. With something buried deep inside, something older than culture. We knew the ice was alive. We felt its turning. We had no words for it, not yet, but we told stories anyway. Stories of the glacier's breath, of the way it waited, of how it did not stop. Not for mountains, not for time, not for us. Beneath the ice, the earth remembered. It always does. Every shift, every silence, every forgotten summer was written into its bones. The pressure of glaciers did not just shape the land, it preserved it. A memory palace made not of stone or scrolls, but of frozen soil and sleeping seeds. Layers of history pressed together, year after year, silence upon silence, until the ground held a story. No, I could read. Not yet, but Max could smell it. He moved with purpose now, nose twitching, paws barely making a sound. There was something below the crust, something small, something warm, a vole, perhaps, or the last breath of a buried plant clinging to life. The snow had fallen soft last night, a powder that blanketed but did not conceal. To Max, it was as if the snow whispered secrets. He paused, head tilted, his ears flicked. Then he began to dig, quick, neat movements, not frantic, practiced. The world around him barely noticed. The winds above carried dust across the sky, fine grains blown from faraway deserts, swept thousands of miles by currents too wide for any one creature to grasp. That dust settled onto the ice, darkening it ever so slightly. And in that slight darkness, a miracle happened. The ice absorbed a little more sunlight, just enough. The process was slow, almost invisible. But over time, centuries, even the darkened ice melted faster than the untouched white. This dust, carried by wind, warmed the glacier, not like a fire, not like the sun, but just enough to shift the balance, just enough to tilt the scales. The earth is full of these delicate weights, quiet balances, small things that matter. Far to the south, where the ice had not reached, grasslands stretched into mist. Herds moved in synchronized chaos, bison, horses, mammoths, reindeer, all crossing open plains shaped by cold but not dominated by it. Predators followed, packs of wolves, lone cats, silent figures painted with blood and ash. Humans, we moved with them, never too far behind, never too close. Our lives were braided into theirs, and into each other. Kinship was not just family, it was the mammoth that fed the tribe, the fire that fed the spirit, the fox that taught us how to hide. Max was out there too, somewhere near the edge of the herd, weaving his path between hoofprints and shadow. Even then, we watched him. Even then, we learned. There was no waste in the Ice Age. Every movement served purpose. Every death fed something. Every loss taught. And Max, he rarely wasted a step. He moved like a thought, quick, light, elusive. He knew where to find warmth, even in the open. He knew how to vanish in plain sight. He knew when to run and when to wait. And he always listened. Listening was survival. We listened, too, sat by fires in the half-light, wrapped in hides, listening to the pop of resin in the wood, the slow breath of our kin sleeping beside us, the sigh of snow against the tent wall, listening to the world outside, listening to the creak of distant trees, the rhythm of falling flakes, the beat of our own hearts, matching the pulse of the earth. In those moments, we did not speak. We remembered. We remembered the last hunt, the way the mammoth's body steamed in the cold, the look in its eye before it fell. We remembered the way Max had passed near the kill site, pausing just long enough to be seen, then gone again, a witness, a reminder. We remembered the stories the old ones told, of spirits that moved in the ice, of stars that watched without blinking, of foxes who were not just foxes. The line between myth and memory was thin as the layer of hoarfrost that formed each dawn. Sometimes, we painted, not because we were bored, not because we needed art, because we needed memory to live outside of us. We took ochre and charcoal, ground it with fat and spit, and made marks. Marks of bison, of deer, of bears, and yes, of foxes. Small, graceful, watching. The caves held our breath, our fears, our reverence. They were warm only by comparison, damp, smelling of stone and age, and yet they were wombs. They were safes. They held what we could not speak, what we dared not forget. Max never entered the caves, but sometimes we saw his tracks outside the entrance, just at the edge, as if he, too, was curious, as if he, too, was remembering. The glacier still pressed from the north, its weight unfelt by some, unbearable to others. Whole ecosystems bowed to its slow advance, and when it moved, it did not do so gently. Sometimes the ice cracked a rupture that echoed like a god's voice through the valleys. Trees trembled, birds fled. The air itself seemed to pause. In those moments, even Max would stop, head up, ears forward, breath held. The earth had spoken, and in its voice was history. What the glacier took, it often kept, but not forever. Buried within its layers were trees, animals, pollen, ash, even breath. Yes, even breath. Tiny bubbles of air, trapped between snowflakes, thousands of years ago, still sleeping in the frozen silence, waiting to be known again. We did not know this then. We only knew the world was changing. A little colder, a little harder. The mammoths moved south. The herds grew thinner. Something was shifting. We felt it in our bones. The sky changed too. Its color, its weight. The stars felt farther away now. Still clear, still sharp, but watching, not welcoming, as if they too sensed a turning point. Max moved less often now. He lingered in familiar places, dug deeper burrows, slept longer. Even he, creature of instinct and ice, felt something gathering on the wind. Something was coming. Not an enemy, not a storm. Something slower, a question forming in the cold. We did not have words for climate, or for extinction, but we knew absence. We knew silence. We knew when things that should be were not, and we marked it, with stones stacked in sorrow, with songs sung to the snow, with stories whispered in the night, where children clung to firelight and waited for Max to reappear, tail curled, eyes bright, breath fogging in the hush. He would return, he always did, but each time, we wondered, for how much longer? The glacier did not answer. It never does. It only moves, slowly, deeply. The fire began, as it always does, with friction. Friction of hand against stone, of thought against memory, of need against the bitter edge of winter. It was not just warmth, it was survival. And as the cold deepened, as the ice pressed tighter into the ribs of the world, fire became more than flame. It became kin. It breathed. It flickered. It remembered. We gathered close, always. Firelight painted our faces in gold and shadow, turning wrinkles into riverbeds, turning eyes into stars. It gave us a center, a circle, a pause. In its glow, time softened. The wind outside still howled, the glacier still creaked its slow warnings, but here, in this glow, we could imagine that the ice might stop, that perhaps, somehow, our little heat could hold the edge of the world at bay. Max watched from the ridge, his eyes, glinting just beyond the light, blinked slowly as snow gathered on his back. He did not come close, he never did, but he stayed near, especially on nights like this, nights when the cold curled tight and the moon sat low. He was a sentinel, a story written in living fur. Some believed he was a spirit, others a scout. We never chased him away. There are things you do not chase. He was not alone. Around us, the world did not sleep, not fully, even in the heart of the Ice Age, even in the hours when night wrapped its arms around the earth for months at a time. Life moved, slowly, carefully, but it moved. In the snow, the ptarmigan nested low, its feathers mottled to match the frost. Beneath the crust, lemmings carved passageways, like veins in a sleeping beast. Lynx moved with the silence of breath, their paws spreading their weight like snowshoes. Owls perched still as stone and struck like falling stars. And in the north, the glacier breathed. It did not melt, not yet, but it shifted, always. groaning in frequencies too low for ears, but loud in the bones of the earth. Its edge cracked and refroze, a rhythm of advance and retreat that did not ask permission. Sometimes, the ice released things, the frozen remains of a bird, feathers still intact, a broken branch from a tree now extinct. Once, a cave lion cub, perfect, preserved, eyes still closed, as if only sleeping, as if the cold had merely paused time instead of ending it. And we, curious, reverent, learned. We learned from what the glacier gave back, from what Max showed us, from the way the wind shifted just before snow fell, or how the frost curled on the east side of the trees. We learned to read the world not as a map, but as a memory. Every trail was a sentence, every track, a word. Max's tracks were always clean, tight, efficient. They curved in ways no other did, deliberate, looped, deceptively light. His presence was easy to miss, unless you were looking. But once you learned to see him, you could not unsee him. He moved in stories, in symbols. He reminded us that the world was not only hard, it was subtle. And fire made it visible. With fire, we told the stories. We spoke of the time the ice cracked like thunder, and the herd turned in fear. We told the tale of the lone hunter, who followed a fox for 3 days, and found not meat, but safety, a cave hidden behind a wall of frost. We laughed at the memory of the child who tried to howl like a wolf, and was answered in the dark. That child was grown now, and still afraid of the dark. Stories mattered. They were not decoration. They were code, warnings, maps disguised as wonder. They held what could not be written. They carried the scent of danger and the warmth of love. We passed them like water, like fire itself. Max was in many of them, sometimes as a trickster, sometimes as a guide, always as a survivor. And that is what we were trying to be, survivors. The ice did not care. The glacier did not hate us. But it did not spare us either. It moved. We moved. And sometimes we failed. Sometimes a blizzard came without warning. Sometimes the firewood ran out. Sometimes the mammoths changed their route. Sometimes someone did not come back. And in those times, Max still came. Not close, not to comfort, but to witness. His shape on the ridge, his tail curled to his nose, his stillness reminding us that the world watched, even when it could not weep. We buried our dead with care, shrouded in hide, wrapped in ash, stones laid carefully to keep the earth from forgetting. We whispered songs over the frozen soil, songs that spoke of warmth, of safe passage, of return. Songs that we had no words for, only breath, only rhythm. Max stayed for those, always just at the edge, as if listening, as if keeping watch. And then, he would vanish, into the snow, into silence. But we knew he'd return. He always did, because he belonged to the ice, and so did we. The glacier was not a villain. It was a chapter, a necessary pause. A breath held for too long, and inside that breath, life adapted, life waited. Seeds did not die, they slept. Dreams did not end, they froze. Time did not stop, it slowed. The snow deepened again, another winter came. The stars circled overhead, indifferent and magnificent. And still, against all odds, the fire burned. Max curled beneath a low ridge, nose tucked under tail, ears twitching at the howls that rolled across the plains. He was not afraid. This was his world, his age, his ice. The cold did not hurt him, it sharpened him. We sat in the glow of flame, unaware of how close to ending everything truly was, not from catastrophe, but from the slow unraveling of balance. From the ice pressing just a little too far, from a sky just a little too dry, from prey growing scarce, from hunger growing near, but not yet. Tonight, we had fire, and stories, and Max. That silence has many voices. There is the silence of falling snow, soft, slow, full of motion you cannot hear. There is the silence of sleep, warm breath against fur, dreams stitched in stillness. There is the silence of grief, when even the wind seems unsure of its place. And then there is the great white silence. The silence of an entire world wrapped in frost. That silence ruled the Ice Age, not with fear, but with presence. It blanketed the land from horizon to horizon, unbroken, unspoken, unending. Even the wind, constant companion to snow and shadow, bowed before it. Sound moved slower here, echoes stretched thin, footsteps faded before they landed. And beneath it all, the earth slept, not dead, not dying, just deeply, profoundly quiet. And within that hush, Max moved. He did not break the silence. He shaped it. A soft crunch here, a sudden stillness there, the gentle rustle of paws against frost-bitten grass. His presence did not disturb the calm. It became part of it, like wind sculpting dunes, like snow layering itself on stone. He moved as silence moved. He was small, but not weak. Size, in this world, meant nothing if it did not come with knowledge. Max had that knowledge in his bones, passed down from ancestors who had known other winters, other stars, other ages. His fur was not just warmth, it was memory, a coat of generations, a camouflage made not only to hide him, but to hold him. The white and gray of him shimmered slightly in moonlight, disappeared utterly in storms. He moved between worlds, sometimes close to the humans, warming his paws near their discarded hearthstones when the flames had long since gone cold. Other times, far beyond their reach, dancing at the edge of the glacier, weaving between the crevasses and listening to the deep, frozen heartbeat of the ice. Max heard things we never could. He heard the mice moving beneath the crust. He heard the wind shift just before a snow squall began. He heard the bones of the earth cracking under the glacier's weight, a sound like the whisper of time itself. And he listened to us, to our footsteps, our voices, our songs rising with firelight into the vast dark. He watched, and we watched him. There was comfort in his presence, though we didn't always say it aloud. Something about his consistency, the way he always returned, the way he remained even when the herds thinned, even when the snow fell harder. Max was part of the pattern, a living thread in the frozen fabric of the world. There were fewer herds now, fewer mammoths, fewer reindeer. The great beasts that once thundered across the plains now moved in smaller numbers, nervously, eyes wide. The grasses that fed them were thinner, the weather harsher. Something had shifted, something deep. We felt it. So did Max. He lingered more now, rested longer, not from weakness, but from calculation. There was less food to chase, less energy to waste. Even the wolves were quieter, leaner, slower. The big predators knew something was changing. The cold, once an ally, had become heavier, less forgiving. And yet, life continued, not because it was easy, but because it had to. The humans, our ancestors, adapted, again, as always. They made their tools sharper, their fires smarter. They stored fat in skins buried beneath the snow. They studied the stars, looking for signs. They painted more often, as if afraid that memory alone might not be enough. The children still laughed, even when the wind howled, even when food was scarce, even when the adults grew quiet. The children played in the snow, chased each other through drifts, tried to mimic the way Max walked, tail low, steps light. They called him the ghost, a good ghost, a lucky one. Sometimes he came close, close enough that they could see the steam of his breath, his eyes catching the firelight for just a moment before he disappeared again. They would squeal and laugh and say he brought good dreams, and maybe he did. Dreams mattered. They were not escapes. They were tools, maps of hope. The mind's way of remembering that warmth existed somewhere, that summer had once been real, that color would return. Max dreamed too. Curled tight in a hollow beneath windswept stone, he dreamed of running, of the chase, of soft fur and full belly, of endless plains without footprints, of skies that did not glare white but shimmered in soft blue. His paws twitched, his ears flicked, his breath puffed in rhythm with another life, a memory or a wish. And then he would wake, eyes open to the snow, to the silence, to the cold. The cold was different now. It bit harder. It stayed longer. Even in places where the sun once returned quickly, it now lagged behind clouds. Whole years passed with barely a thaw. Glaciers, once creeping slowly, surged forward. Valleys vanished. Rivers froze solid to their beds. And still Max endured. He moved less. He ate less. But he endured. So did we. We bundled tighter. We sang louder. We followed the fox tracks not just for food, but for direction. He often found safety long before we sensed danger. If the fox turned east, we turned east. If he vanished, we watched the sky. The old ones began to say, "Where Max goes, we follow." It wasn't worship. It was wisdom. Because Max had no stories to confuse him, no hopes to blind him. Only the ice. Only the land. Only what was real. What was now. What was true. The silence deepened. The night sky stretched longer than ever. Whole moons passed before the sun returned, and when it did, it was weak, a pale memory of light. Shadows remained even at midday. The snow did not melt. It thickened. But we waited. The fire never truly died. It faltered. It begged. But it stayed. Passed from hand to hand. Carried in embers. Shielded in skin. We huddled around it, telling stories of warmth, as if the words themselves could coax spring back into being. Max waited too. He sat upon the ridge, tail curled, nose pointed at the horizon, watching the glacier, listening to the world, holding still in that great white silence, not out of fear, not out of despair, but out of understanding, because Max knew something we often forget. Silence is not the end. It is the beginning. The sky did not sleep, even when the world below froze solid, even when the air itself felt like crystal and the trees stood silent as stone. The sky still turned, slowly, relentlessly. The stars wheeled overhead in ancient rhythm, constellations we did not name yet, but recognized. Shapes carved by light, woven into memory by firelight and fear and awe. And beneath that great ceiling, we lay still, curled beside each other for warmth, wrapped in hides stiffened by frost, breathing quietly, not talking, just listening. Listening to the fire crackle, to the distant howl of wolves far beyond the valley, to the wind moving through trees like a ghost with too many voices, and sometimes to Max. He did not sing like the wolves. He didn't need to, but his presence was a note in the song of the night, light, sharp, brief, a bark like a question, a rustle in the snow like punctuation. His shadow sometimes passed between us and the fire, and no one stirred. He was welcome. He was known. He moved with the quiet confidence of something that belonged to the land, not just upon it. The snow bent beneath his paws, and then forgot him instantly. His scent faded like breath. He lived in a world of echoes and subtleties we barely understood, and yet, we watched him. We always did. Because Max remembered something we had forgotten. A kind of freedom, a kind of clarity, a life without explanation. He did not think about tomorrow. He did not plan for the spring. He did not wonder what would become of the glacier. He simply lived. He trusted his senses. He followed what was true, and he adapted, not with resistance, but with grace. He was not stronger than the cold. He just moved with it. The wind that stiffened our fingers barely seemed to touch him. The frost that cracked our lips only kissed his fur. He was a creature shaped by the same hands that carved the ice. A whisper made visible, and still, he endured. We tried to do the same. Each day began without promise. The sun, when it appeared, offered no warmth, only light, pale light, thin as ice. Sometimes, it didn't rise at all. Only a dim gray glow spilled over the horizon, enough to see the path, but not the destination. We walked anyway. We followed the herds when we could find them. We scavenged when we couldn't. We knew the old trails, but they were changing. The land shifted under our feet, ice covering what was once passable, rivers turning solid, caves collapsing under the weight of too many winters. And still we moved. We followed not only the animals, we followed signs, a tree twisted by wind, a stone shaped like a face, the tracks of Max zigzagging across the slope. His trails were not always useful. Sometimes they looped in confusion, as if playing, but even then, they gave us something precious. Proof that something else had survived. Proof that even in the hardest cold, life could still move. Max did not linger near our shelters often, but there were nights, rare and quiet, when we would wake and find him curled near the edge of the firelight, not sleeping, not resting, just being, watching the flames, blinking slowly, and then he would rise, shake the snow from his coat, and vanish. It felt like a blessing. Even the children didn't chase him. They knew. Somehow, they knew. The elders said he was older than he looked, that creatures like Max were born, not from mothers, but from frost and breath and time, that when he left footprints, he was writing a kind of song into the snow, that his tail swept the past away, and his eyes saw more than just the present. No one argued, because the more we watched the glacier, the more we began to understand how small we were. It was not cruel, it was not kind, it simply existed, like the moon, like the stars, like Max. And still, somehow, there was comfort in that. The fire grew low. We fed it slowly, carefully, not wasting a twig. Wood was precious. Every branch meant another hour of warmth. Every ember, another chance at sleep. We sat in silence, heads bowed, and listened to the crackle, the hiss, the soft breath of burning moss. And outside, snow, always snow, falling, drifting, wrapping the world in a kind of soft forgetting. It muffled sound, it softened shape, it erased lines, and Max moved through it as though he were part of it. His coat turned near invisible in the dusk. Only his eyes betrayed him, bright, alive, questioning. He watched us as we watched him, and sometimes we wondered, did he understand us? Did he know what we were? Did he think we were wise or slow? Did he think we belonged here at all? Because the truth was, this world was not made for us. Not really. We had entered it, learned to survive it, learned to read its signs and move with its rhythm. But it was never shaped for our comfort. The cold did not forgive. The land did not yield. The ice did not pause. We were always one wrong step from silence, but we had each other, and fire, and stories, and Max. He reminded us that survival was possible, that even something small, something alone, could outlast the storm. He reminded us that not every miracle needed fire or shelter or spear. Sometimes, all it needed was fur, and silence, and a way to disappear. And in the long nights, when the moon sat heavy above the trees, and the glacier whispered secrets we could not hear, we watched the snow fall. We listened to our own breath. We leaned into the warmth, and we waited, not for spring, not yet, that was still far away, but for the sound of tiny feet, for the rustle of fur in the powder, for the glimpse of a tail curling into sleep just beyond the firelight. We waited for Max, and when he came, we said nothing. Because in a world made of ice and memory, some things do not need words. The silence changed, not all at once, not like thunder or the crack of a breaking branch, but slowly, deeply, like the way water thickens before it freezes, like the way dreams feel different just before waking. It was a change you could only sense if you listened with your whole body, and we were always listening. In a world carved by frost, where breath steamed in the dark and firelight flickered like memory, silence was not empty. It was filled with detail, with meaning, with warning. There were kinds of silence we understood, the soft hush before snowfall, the pause between wolf howls, the stillness of a herd just before it ran. These were known, lived in, trusted, but this was different. Even Max noticed. He stopped more often now, halfway through his steps, ears angled toward, nothing, not twitching, not alert, just holding still. He would remain like that for several heartbeats, head low, eyes distant. Then he would blink once, and continue. Quiet, light, but something in him was listening for something we couldn't hear, and we trusted his silence. Because Max moved through the world in ways we did not. He wasn't confined to paths or patterns. He didn't carry the weight of memory as we did, at least not in the same way. He didn't build fires. He didn't mark walls with ochre. He didn't pass stories from one voice to another. His language was movement. His stories were told in footprints. His memory was the land itself. And yet, we felt connected. He had been with us through the hard winters, the lean years, the long nights. He had watched our fires and sniffed our trails and curled beneath the stars not far from where our children slept. In the story of this world, this cold, old world, Max was a chapter of his own. And now, the silence he carried was growing heavier, not in fear, but in distance. The world was shifting. Even the sky seemed different. The stars, while still clear, now seemed farther away, like lights behind glass. The auroras moved less often. The winds came from new angles. The snow, though still falling, felt thinner, less certain in its weight. The glacier still loomed in the north, but it too had changed. We could feel it in the bones of the land, a kind of tension, a holding of breath. The animals felt it first. The mammoths had once moved in wide circles, predictable across the seasons. Now, they scattered. Their roots broke. Some herds never returned. Reindeer wandered too far east. The bison grew skittish, and the predators, wolves, cats, bears, they grew quieter. Not absent, just subdued, like something had taken their voice. And we, shaped by observation, could not ignore it. Even the caves felt colder, not in temperature, but in memory, as if the walls themselves were forgetting. The hands we had painted, the spirals and animals, they remained, but they seemed more fragile, more distant, as if drawn by someone else, long ago, as if we were visitors in our own past. Still, we gathered. We built fires and huddled close, passing stories like bread, slowly, carefully, with both hands. And Max's name was still there, in the tales, in the laughter, in the long pauses where someone would glance toward the door and swear they had just seen him pass by. He was becoming more myth than memory, not because he was gone, but because we needed him that way. We needed symbols now, more than ever, because the cold was no longer our only enemy. It was something deeper, something quieter, a thinning of the world, a forgetting. The very land seemed to be pulling back, taking less from the sun, offering less to the wind, withdrawing into itself like a bear curling in its den. Max curled too. We found one of his shelters once, beneath the shadow of a bent pine where the snow drifted shallow. He wasn't there, but the den was fresh, a soft hollow carved in the earth, lined with shed fur, still warm at the edges. We didn't disturb it. We stood in a circle around it, breathing in the scent, faint musk, dry pine, cold soil, and then we left. Quietly. It felt sacred, like a temple, or a memory made visible. And when we returned to our fire, we told no one else. Some things do not belong to everyone. Some things are meant to be held in silence. The elders spoke that night, not in panic, not in fear, but in recognition. They said the ice had done this before, come and gone, carved and receded, that the earth breathed in centuries, and we were only here for one small breath. They said we had been lucky to survive so long, that perhaps it was time to leave this cold place behind. But where? The ice was everywhere. To the north, only glacier. To the west, mountains too steep. to the south, maybe. If the rivers still ran, if the grass still grew, if the herds remembered the way. And so a decision was made, not in haste, not by command, but in agreement. Some would go, some would stay, a slow splitting, a quiet farewell. We were not tribes divided, only a single branch growing in two directions. The cold had taught us not to fight the wind, but to lean with it. The fire burned lower that night. Max did not come, but we saw his prints near the edge of camp the next morning. A tight loop, a pause, and then a trail heading south, the same direction we had chosen. It felt like a sign, like permission, like hope. We followed. Not all at once, not in a line, but gradually, camp by camp, fire by fire. Southward, toward warmth, toward uncertainty, toward whatever came next. And Max led the way. Sometimes visible, sometimes not. Sometimes only a single paw print in the snow. But it was enough. It was always enough. The path south was not marked. There were no signs, no stone cairns, no songs etched into the land to guide our feet. Only instinct, only hope, only the quiet knowledge that the cold, the true, so deep cold, had passed some threshold, and we could no longer remain unchanged beside it. And so, we moved. Not as a march, not even as a migration. It was quieter than that. Like the falling of snow, like a long-held breath being exhaled at last. A few families at first, then more, never all at once. Fires burned behind us, footprints melted, and the land, as always, prepared to forget. But not Max. He was already ahead. His tracks were the only sign we followed at times for neat prints in the crusted snow. A delicate path etched into the drifts like calligraphy. Not always straight, not always certain, but always moving forward, always deeper into the gray unknown. And we trusted him, because Max never moved blindly. Where we saw only fog or whiteout, he saw shape. He moved toward something, not away. He sought the edge of the cold, the boundary where winter softened and breath no longer curled in panic. And slowly, slowly, we learned to do the same. The landscape changed, barely, but we noticed. The snow was thinner in places, not warmer, not yet, but less hostile. Trees, once skeletons under ice, now showed bark again. Branches dripped with melt. The wind had a voice, now not only hunger, but song. We began to hear birds again, not many, but some, and oh, how we listened. Their cries felt like color, like sound coming back to a world that had forgotten how to echo. The children looked up, mouths open, tracing their flight. And the elders, those who remembered before the ice thickened, wept silently into their furs. Because this was life. This was the beginning of after. And Max. He paused often now. He would sit at the crest of a rise, tail curled tightly, ears forward, scanning the horizon. He was not afraid. He was not uncertain. But he was attentive, always attentive, as though weighing the choices of the land before committing his feet to it. We mirrored him. When he stopped, we waited. When he climbed, we climbed. And when he vanished into the fog, we trusted he would return, because he always did. Sometimes not until nightfall, sometimes only as a streak of white between the trees. But his presence was no longer rare. It was woven into the rhythm of our journey, a silent companion, a guide who asked nothing and gave everything. We did not speak to him, but we spoke of him. At every fire, his name rose, not reverently, not in worship, but with warmth, with familiarity, with the kind of affection one gives to a sibling who lives far away, but still writes letters in the snow. He was myth and memory now, alive and becoming something more, and the land remembered him. Every hollow he had slept in, every ridge he had paused upon, the world bore his signature, if you knew how to read it. His fur on the bark of trees, his scent where the frost lingered longer than elsewhere. We learned to read him not as a beast, but as a book, and still, we moved. Days became longer. Slowly, the sun hung a little higher. Light spilled across the horizon, not as a whisper, but a full breath. Shadows returned, and with them, depth, and with depth, the possibility of color. We began to see green again, faint, tentative, but unmistakable. At first, just a mossy smear beneath melting snow, then shoots, then buds, and finally, after weeks of silence, a flower. Small, fragile, bright blue. A child found it, bent over it, cupped it with 2 frost-bitten hands, and then ran back to the fire, cheeks flushed, breath tangled in excitement. And we gathered to see. One flower, one truth. The world had not died, only slept. And in its waking, we found pieces of ourselves we had forgotten. We began to speak of the future, not as fantasy, but as plan. We spoke of building, of returning to rivers, of mapping stars. The silence behind us was still vast, but ahead there was song, and Max. He changed too, not in form, but in rhythm. He no longer lingered at the edge. He moved among us more freely, still untouchable, still wild, but present, less a shadow, more a presence. At times, he would sit just outside the fire's circle and tilt his head as we laughed, as if trying to understand why humans made sound when nothing was chasing them. One night, he brought something, a bone, long bleached, dragged from who knows where. He dropped it at the edge of camp, looked at us once, and walked away. We said nothing, but one of the old women, the one who had lost her son to the glacier, rose, walked to the bone, picked it up, and kissed it. She said thank you. No one asked what she meant. Some things do not require explanation, because Max was not just guiding our feet. He was teaching us to remember, and to let go. He was teaching us that survival is not only fire, and fat, and fur. It is attention. It is knowing when to move, when to wait, when to mourn, and when to look up and see, truly see, the path ahead. Because beyond the trees, beyond the melting streams, beyond the last hill worn thin by winter's breath, there was something else. A valley, soft, green, warm, and Max had seen it. He had seen it first. The valley didn't reveal itself all at once. It unfolded, slowly, gently, as though waking from a dream. It had no urgency to escape. First came the light, golden, not gray, not winter's bleached pale, but something deeper, thicker. It pooled between trees and lingered on bark. It touched our faces and felt we hadn't felt that kind of warmth in seasons. And then came the air. It moved differently here, softer, less sharp. It didn't cut the skin or sting the lungs. It carried scent, pine, wet earth, new leaves. That smell, fresh and green, made some of us cry without understanding why. It reminded us of something ancient, something before the cold, before the glacier, something we had lost. And then came the sound. No longer just the wind or our own quiet breath, but birdsong, water dripping from high places, the buzz of insects returning to life. The world here made noise again, not the noise of danger, but of presence, of rhythm, of life resuming itself without apology. It felt like crossing into a memory we had not lived, but somehow belonged to. Max was the first to enter. Of course he was. He had known, even before we did. His body so light, so knowing, had pointed in this direction from the start, not in certainty, but in trust. He had followed something we could not see. He had listened to a song we were not yet quiet enough to hear. And now we were quiet. We followed him over the final ridge, and there it was. The valley green, sprawling, sheltered. A place the glacier had not yet touched, or perhaps had touched once, long ago, and decided to leave untouched. It dipped gently between hills, bordered by trees older than memory. A stream wound through its center, clear and bright, cutting a soft path through moss and stone. It was not paradise, but it was enough. The snow still lingered in corners. The wind still whispered from the north. But here there was time, space, possibility. We looked at one another and saw not survivors, but settlers. Not wanderers, but returners. Because this place felt like coming back to something. We built no fires that first night. We sat in the dusk, listening, letting the valley introduce itself, letting it speak. Max did not sit with us, but he remained close. We saw him moving along the ridge, nose down, tail low, making his rounds. He was not restless. He was mapping, scenting, measuring the rhythm of this place against the rhythm of himself. He was deciding if it would hold, not for us, but for him. And when he circled back and curled beneath a tree, not far from where we rested, tail wrapped around his nose, ears flicking at the dusk breeze, we knew we were allowed to stay, and so we did. There was no ceremony, no planting of flags or drawing of borders, only quiet understanding. We began gathering stones, clearing brush, setting hides to dry on the sun-warmed rocks. The children laughed again, not out of defiance or to chase off fear, just joy. We did not forget what we had come from. The cold still lived in our bones. The hunger still flickered in the corners of our eyes. We had known too many long nights to think this was an ending. It was not. The cold would return. The world would shift again. But this was a pause. And in that pause, we remembered how to breathe. Max explored freely now, no longer only ahead or away. He moved through us, not apart from us. Still wild, still alone, but present. The children left bits of dried meat for him near the edges of camp. He ignored it most of the time, but occasionally when no one watched, he would take it, and we learned. We watched how he moved through this new place, where he dug, where he drank, where he slept. He never stayed long in one spot. He was not a creature of permanence, but his choices taught us. This patch of moss was warmer in the mornings. That hollow stayed dry after rain. That ridge caught wind early and helped keep insects away. Max was not a guide in the way humans guide. He did not point. He did not wait. He simply moved with attention. And if we paid attention, we understood. We began to draw again. Not in caves, there were none here yet, but in the dirt, on bark. With hands and fingers and charcoal, we drew the valley. We drew Max. We drew the glacier, still distant but no longer at our backs. We drew stars. We drew the sound of birds. Yes, the sound. We tried to capture it, the rise, the fall, the way a trill hung in the air after the bird had gone. We drew sound not to contain it, but to remember what it meant. Because here, things meant again. Our stories changed. Not just survival stories now, not just warnings, but beginnings. Myths that started with light, not darkness. Stories of water, of seeds, of Max leading us not from death, but toward something new, something that could grow. The old woman, the one who had kissed the bone, began teaching again. Not rules, not rituals, but songs. She said she remembered one from before the glacier, from when she was small. A song about rain, sung to trees. She sang it softly, voice cracked but steady, and the trees listened, and so did we, and so did Max. He stood at the edge of camp, ears turned toward her voice. He did not move, did not blink, just listened, the same way he listened to snow, to wind, to silence. And when she finished, he vanished into the trees, as if carrying the song with him, as if planting it. We watched the stars that night. New stars now, southern stars, arranged differently, telling different stories. We would learn them, in time, but for now, we simply lay back, breathing in air that did not bite, beneath a sky that no longer pressed down, and we whispered to each other the same word, over and over. as if naming it made it real. Home. The first fire we built in the valley wasn't for warmth. It was for marking something. Not territory, not conquest. We weren't conquerors. We had no desire to own this place. But we did need to be seen by it, heard by it, welcomed by it, not just as guests, but as those who had come with reverence, not with force. So we built it slowly, stone by stone, wood by wood. The dry branches were strange to us, lighter, less dense than the gnarled icewood of the north. They caught flame easily, with a softness we hadn't known in many seasons. The fire was warmer, too, less angry. It crackled gently, like it was glad to be burning, like it had waited. We sat around it in silence, listening, to the wood, to the air, to the shift in how warmth touched our skin, no longer like rescue, but like embrace. And we noticed Max, watching. Not from the edge of the trees this time, but nearer, just beyond the ring of firelight. Close enough to see his breath, curling in the cool evening air. Close enough to hear the faint crunch of his paws as he shifted weight. He was not cautious, he was curious. The fire did not frighten him anymore. He tilted his head, then sat, and watched. And we knew somehow that this fire was for him too. We didn't speak. There was no need. The glow of the flames, the hush of the forest, the scent of moss and wood smoke, it all held the moment in place. We had nothing to declare, no stories to boast. We were simply there, alive, present. And that was enough. The children had begun naming places, not in the old tongue, not yet, but in whispers, and giggles, and pointed fingers. The bent tree became Sleepy Arm. The hollow by the stream was the pool of foxes, though only Max had been seen near it. A mossy hill was crowned Belly Rock, because lying atop it felt like resting against the earth's slow breath. They asked if Max had a name. We told them he already had one, but they gave him others anyway. Snowtail, Whisper, Cloudstep Friend. He answered to none. He acknowledged all. His world didn't depend on names the way ours did, but he still heard them. We could tell. Some nights, we'd catch him near the fires again. Not for food, though sometimes someone would slide a scrap toward the dark and pretend not to notice when it disappeared. Not for company. Not in the way we knew it. He came for presence. For warmth. For something wordless. The same reason we came. The valley had its own stories. We could feel them beneath our feet. The stones here were older than us. The trees had watched seasons we could not name. The river spoke in syllables we had not yet learned to hear. But Max listened. Always. And so we learned to listen, too. To the way the leaves moved when the wind was about to change. To the hush of birds before a sudden rain. To the way silence pressed down when something in the dark was watching. We had not forgotten survival, but we no longer clung to it with our teeth. Now, we lived, truly lived. The food was better, roots and berries, and small game. The stream was generous with fish, silver, and fast. We ate without guilt now, without that hard edge of fear that it might be our last meal. We still shared always, but laughter returned, full laughter, deep, belly laughter. Laughter that echoed and made the trees lean in to listen. We sang more. The old woman, her voice a thread between generations, sang every morning now, even when it rained, even when it was hard to wake. She said the trees expected it, that they had become used to her sound, and it would be rude to stop. The children sang too. They made up nonsense songs about birds and bugs, and how Max's tail moved like a dancing leaf. They sang to each other, to the fire, to the wind. They sang because they could, and Max stayed. That was the biggest change. He no longer came and went in mystery. He was part of the land. Yes, never ours, never tethered, but he lingered now. Mornings often began with someone saying, "I saw him near the pool," or he followed the path past the tall pine. His presence became less myth, more rhythm, still wild, still his own, but near, always near, and in that nearness was comfort. The valley began to shape around our patterns, or maybe we shaped around its quiet guidance. New shelters were built, not just to block wind or cold, but to catch the sun, to listen to the birds. We used bark and stone and bone, but also color. The children painted again, bright lines, spirals, foxes with long tails, and clever eyes. We did not fear the old world anymore, we honored it, but it no longer held us. Even the glacier, so far now we could only remember its shape in dream, felt less like a threat and more like a teacher, a shadow that once tested our will and gave us the gift of knowing ourselves. We would not forget it, but we no longer needed to carry its cold in our blood. Max still ventured beyond the valley. Of course he did. There were nights he was gone too, sometimes 3 at a time. We didn't worry. We knew he belonged to more than just this place. He returned each time, quiet as snow, slipping back into the rhythm of our days without announcement. And each return reminded us that this place was not only a home, it was a beginning, a pause, a breath between what was and what could be. We had crossed a long silence. We had outlived the ice. And here, in this soft cradle of green and light and sound, we had found not just safety, but song and Max. He was the thread that stitched it all together. Not a god, not a pet, not a symbol, just himself. And that was everything. Time softened. It didn't stop. The sun still traced its slow arc across the sky. The moon still pulled the tides of our sleep. But in the valley, time didn't press against our skin the way it had before. It unfolded like moss beneath feet, like smoke from a quiet fire, like Max's footprints. Fading slowly into the morning light, we didn't count the days, not the way we used to. Back in the north, days had been measured in what was lost, how many fish left, how much fat remained, how far the glacier had crept. Every sunrise had been a calculation. Can we make it one more day? Will the cold steal from us again? But here we measured in growth. The height of new saplings, the thickness of the deer, the way children's laughter stretched longer into the dusk. There were more flowers now. The stream was clearer. Even the birds built their nests lower, as if they, too, had stopped fearing the wind. And Max was still here, but quieter. He didn't disappear, but he moved differently now, less watchful, less solitary. Still alone, always alone, but at ease. We saw him napping in the sun, sprawled across a flat stone, like an offering. We saw him curled into a tight circle beneath the birch trees, white tail covering his nose, ears flicking in his sleep, and sometimes, just sometimes, we heard him dreaming. Small sounds, not yips, not howls, but something like a memory wrapped in breath, a low hum, a tiny whimper, as if he remembered something far away, something he'd carried all the way from the glacier, and now, at last, he could let it go. We never woke him. His dreams belonged to the land now, as did we. The fire had become more than warmth. It had become tradition. Every 7th sunset, we gathered around it, not to survive, but to speak. No one led, no one ruled. We simply came with our stories, our thoughts, our thanks. One night, someone asked softly, carefully, "Do you think you'll stay forever?" They didn't say Max's name. They didn't have to. Everyone looked toward the trees. He wasn't there, not visibly, but we all knew he was listening. The old woman answered, voice low, eyes half closed. He is forever, whether he stays or not. And we felt it, that truth. Because Max wasn't just a fox anymore. He was a thread woven into our survival, a white flicker in the darkness of our worst nights, a pause before the decision to move forward, a shape that said, yes, go, you can still live. We didn't ask him to stay. We didn't need to. His presence was not about possession. It was about rhythm. He was the music of the land made visible, a song we were lucky enough to hum along with, even if only for a while. And still, he lingered, longer than anyone expected. He walked through the camp like mist, never touched, never startled, never tethered, but always there. He watched the children grow. He watched the old ones fade. He listened to the rain on hide roofs. He sat beside the fire on cold nights, not for warmth, but for memory. Because he remembered, too. He had been with us when we nearly fell apart, and now he stayed, to witness us coming together. The seasons turned. Spring deepened into summer. The grasses grew tall and thick. The deer returned in herds. The fruit trees, once dry and hesitant, began to offer without reluctance. There was enough now. Enough for us. Enough for the land. Enough to dream beyond just the next meal. We built, not shelters, we already had those, but something else. Spaces for gathering, for art, for stillness. Circles made of stone. Carvings in the trees. We made wind chimes from bone and shell. We marked paths with painted stones. We carved Max's tail into wood, not to trap him in image, but to honor the way it moved, because the way Max moved was art. It reminded us how to be, how to enter a space with respect, how to leave no scar, how to listen to what is not said. The children followed him sometimes, not close, never close, but far enough to learn. They would trace his steps along the moss, trying to match his stride. They practiced stillness, crouched low in the grass, waiting to see if he'd notice. He always did. He never acknowledged them directly, but he slowed his pace. Let them watch, let them learn. He was not their pet, he was their first teacher, their truest wild. And we, older, slower, perhaps less nimble, we learned from them. We watched how they moved, how they read the land now, not with fear, but with joy. They saw opportunity where we once saw danger. They saw possibility in every leaf. And Max walked beside that joy, no longer carrying our sorrow, no longer bearing the silence of cold lands, but walking in the warmth of what had become possible. One morning, the eldest boy in the camp came to the fire early, before the smoke, before the coals glowed. He sat with his knees pulled to his chest and whispered. I dreamed I was running beside him. He didn't explain, he didn't have to. We all dreamed of Max, now and then. Not because we missed him, he was still here, but because he had become a language, a symbol, a shared knowing that lived somewhere deeper than memory. He was our reminder that survival could be beautiful, that instinct could be kind, that silence could be sacred. And the valley held him, not in cages, not in walls, but in wind, in rhythm, in the way we moved now, slower, softer, attentive, like foxes, like people who knew the value of watching, of pausing, of curling up into sleep, not with fear, but with peace. Max yawned, once, beneath the rising sun. We saw his teeth flash, sharp and ancient and perfect. And then he trotted off, tail high, head low, body barely touching the earth. We didn't follow. We didn't need to. We simply watched and smiled. Because when Max ran, it meant everything was still in balance. And when balance is a fox, running through morning mist, you let it run. The places he touched, remembered him. Even after he had gone, the grass didn't spring back right away from where he lay. The bark of the trees bore faint white threads of fur, caught between ridges like gentle secrets. The moss beneath his feet, soft, dark, damp, grew greener there, as if the memory of his weight stirred something awake, and we began to notice these subtle signatures. Max didn't move like a visitor anymore. He moved like something meant to be here, something that had always been here, something we had only just remembered how to see. There was a hollow beneath the twin birch trees where he'd often sleep. The children began calling it the listening place, not because it was quiet, though it was, but because things felt louder there, somehow, every sound clearer, every breath deeper. The wind moved in spirals there, The leaves spun even when the rest of the forest was still. Some believed the valley had given that spot to Max. Others whispered it had belonged to him all along. He didn't stay in one place, of course. He was too wild for that. He came and went, like smoke between fingers, visible only when the light was right. But those places, those hollowed beds in the grass, those worn patches along the ridge, those stones rubbed smooth from his passing, they became part of our language. Leave it by the sleeping spot, beyond the fox's trail, toward the wind where Max runs. It became how we gave directions, how we described time. The moon that followed Max's longest silence. The morning Max returned after the 3-day storm. The season Max brought the feather. Yes, the feather. It was long, pale, almost silver. We didn't know the bird, had never seen one like it in the valley. The elders said it came from beyond, from further south, where warmth came in waves instead of whispers. Max dropped it at the edge of the fire circle, then sat and waited. No one moved at first. We weren't sure if it was a gift or a message. But the old woman, her eyes now misty with age, voice raspier than ever, stood and lifted the feather. "Not for me," she said, "for the land." And she walked into the woods and planted it in the earth. Nothing grew there, not at first. But we knew something had shifted, because the next day we saw Max resting beside it, and 2 birds, not the same, not silver, but new, sang from the trees above. It was as if he'd opened a door, a thin one, but real. The valley seemed to shift again after that, not visibly, but beneath. The river changed its song. The insects came in new patterns. The breeze carried smells we couldn't name. And Max, he still walked alone, but not as far, and not for as long. Sometimes we wondered if the land had begun speaking to him in return, not just in instinct, or scent, or sound, but truly, deeply, as a conversation. The way it once spoke to us, long ago, before we forgot how to listen. We tried to learn. We sat beside the stream longer, closed our eyes more, held our breath when the wind passed through trees. We walked without speaking. We watched how shadows moved across the moss. We touched bark and waited for it to touch us back. And sometimes, just sometimes, we felt it. That pulse beneath everything. That whisper inside the soil. The quiet yes that says, "You are still part of this." Because we had forgotten. The ice had taken that from us. Made the world into an enemy. A thing to fight, to run from, to conquer. But Max, he had never forgotten. He had kept the thread alive, even when we let go. And now, because of him, we could tie it back together. The days grew warmer. Slowly, the trees filled out. The grasses bent heavy with seed. The air turned thick with life. Some animals returned that we had only ever heard about in story. The broad antlered ones, silent and soft-hoofed. The striped ones, fierce-eyed and elegant. Birds that hovered in place, wings a blur of green and gold. The valley was becoming more than refuge. It was becoming home. And Max, he remained. We had expected him to leave when the danger passed, to vanish back into myth when survival no longer needed him. But he didn't. He stayed. Not always within sight, but always close, always near, like a breath at the edge of a dream. We made him no shrine. He would have hated that. We carved no statue. We wrote no prayers. But we did one thing. Quietly, softly, without ceremony. We gathered bits of his trail, the places he touched, the furs he shed, the bones he carried, and laid them out in a spiral. A living path, a circle that could never quite be closed. The children called it the loop. They'd walk it barefoot, eyes closed. Some said it made their hearts beat louder. Some said they could hear the snow there, even in the heat of summer. We said nothing. We didn't need to, because Max had already spoken. With each step, each glance, each pause before the fire, each tilt of his head when the wind carried a question. He had said, "Live," and we had answered, "We will." Time, in the valley, was no longer a straight line. It folded, bent like river water around a stone, curved like smoke through tall grass, curled like Max, asleep beneath the ferns. We began to notice that the past didn't stay behind us anymore. It lingered, it circled, it returned, not as fear, not as grief, but as memory softened by warmth. Evenings became longer, the kind of long that makes you sit down without meaning to, the kind that invites stories out of the mouth without force. We'd find ourselves gathered at the fire again, not because we were cold, but because we missed the sound of each other's breath, because we liked the way the flames danced on the faces we knew. And Max, he always came when the fire burned low, not at the beginning, that wasn't his way, but near the end, when the voices quieted, when the children fell asleep, when the stories softened into silence and the crackle of embers carried the rest. That's when he'd appear, silent, still, bright eyes glinting in the dark, tail curled, ears up, waiting, and we understood the fire was not only for us, it was for him too, a place to return to, a signal that said, "I'm still here, we're still listening." The trees had grown fuller. Their shadows no longer frightened us. They wrapped us instead, like cool fingers across the shoulders, like shade cupped over the top of a newborn's head. We learned their moods, which ones liked to sing when the wind came through, which ones wept silently after a rain. The children swore, some of the trees followed Max's movements, that their limbs swayed when he passed, even if the wind didn't blow. And maybe they were right, because when Max moved, everything shifted. The silence bent, the light dipped, the earth tilted, just slightly, not in fear, but in recognition, like even the land whispered, "There he is." He had become more than presence now. He had become rhythm, a way to walk, a way to pause, a way to choose stillness over sound. The youngest boy, not yet old enough to carve, but old enough to notice, came to us one morning with a question. Where does Max go? When he goes, we didn't know. We had never followed. Not out of fear, not out of respect, just understanding. Wherever he went, it was not ours to know. That was part of the gift. His leaving made his staying mean more. His absences made his returns sacred. But the boy was restless. He wanted an answer. So the old woman, her voice now like wind through a cracked bone flute, took his hand and said, "Come with me." She brought him to the edge of the stream. They didn't speak. She knelt, dipped her fingers in the water, let the current pass through her knuckles. Then she whispered, "This is where he goes." The boy looked confused. "But the stream is here." She smiled, slowly, with the weight of many winters behind her eyes. Exactly. And that was that. Because where Max went was everywhere. He belonged to the parts of the valley we didn't touch. The high stones where birds nested, the deer paths through the tall reeds, the black pools that shimmered only under starlight. He belonged to the hush of dawn and the deep breath of dusk. And even when we didn't see him, we felt him, in the twitch of a leaf, in the pause before birdsong, in the way our feet sometimes stopped walking without our minds telling them to. His absence was never truly empty. It was shaped. It was waiting. One night, the fire burned lower than usual. There had been a wind, not violent, but restless, and we had let the flames die down early. We stayed seated anyway, looking up, listening, and there he was, Max, closer than ever. He stepped into the ring of sleeping bodies, past blankets, past outstretched limbs. He walked like breath, so quiet, the flames barely noticed. His paws didn't stir the ash. His fur glowed like starlight wrapped in snow. He came right to the center, where the coals still glimmered, and he sat, right there, in the warmth, among us, and no one moved. Not even the children. It was a moment we didn't name, didn't speak about the next day, because it was only that night's. The valley gave us gifts like that sometimes, and Max was the greatest of them. The oldest girl began carving again. She hadn't since her brother passed, seasons ago, before the valley, before the snow broke. She used to carve birds and fish, and once, a bear whose back held a hidden hollow. But now, she carved something else, a fox. Not perfect, not detailed, just a shape, just a feeling of Max. She carved one every week, left them in places she had seen him walk. She said nothing about it, but we all found them, small, smooth, always placed with care. One under the birch, one near the stream, one beside the ashes of the old fire ring. It wasn't worship, it was gratitude, because we knew now deeply, wordlessly, that Max wasn't just with us, he was of us. He was the part of us that had survived the glacier, not just in body, but in soul. The instinct that said, go further, try once more, follow the light, sleep when needed, listen when afraid. He was every pause that saved our lives, every risk we took that didn't destroy us, every path chosen by feeling, not fear. And now, in this valley, we finally had room to understand that, room to remember what it felt like to trust something invisible, room to believe that silence could carry meaning, room to follow, not because we were lost, but because something wild was still worth listening to. And as long as Max was here, the wild still spoke. The first time someone said Max's name aloud, while he wasn't near, the forest paused, not in fear, not in warning, but in something closer to reverence. We were sitting by the quiet pool, the one we used to call the Pool of Foxes, though now it was just his. One of the older children, almost an adult now, had been tracing ripples in the water with a stick, and softly whispered, I wonder if Max will come today. And then, stillness. Even the waters seemed to hesitate. Even the birds held their breath. It wasn't a punishment, we understood that instantly. It was attention. The world heard the name, and remembered it, because Max was no longer just a fox. He had become the breath between sounds. The pause in the forest that tells you something is near. Not to be feared, not to be chased, but to be honored. We didn't say his name often, not because we weren't thinking of him, but because the name meant something now. It was a kind of invitation, a kind of offering, and you don't offer something unless you're ready for it to arrive. That night, he didn't come, not visibly, but no one doubted that he had heard. The fire flickered taller than usual, even with little fuel. The wind curled in odd patterns, and someone swore, in the way that doesn't need to be believed, that they felt a warm body settle beside them in the dark. Just for a moment. We didn't ask for proof anymore. Max had never been about proof. He had always been about presence. The season was changing again. Not harshly, not like the glacier times, but slowly, like an exhale. The leaves turned yellow at the tips. The wind came from a new direction. The berries tasted sharper, and our hearts began to ache, just a little, not from pain, but from memory, from the way this place had become ours, from the way we had become part of it, and from the way Max had walked beside us the entire journey. There were whispers that this would be the season he left, not forever, but for a while. Foxes, even ones like him, didn't always stay for the cold. They followed other winds, older paths, but we didn't mourn it, not yet. We simply began to notice the edges of his presence, the way his paw prints lingered less, the way his scent faded faster, the way the forest no longer echoed his passing with the same hush. He was preparing, we thought, not for death, but for distance. And that was almost harder, because it meant we'd still feel him, still see the shape of him in every bend of grass, still expect to hear him brushing past the leaves. But we wouldn't. We would look, and the place would be empty, and somehow, that ache, that subtle silence, felt heavier than absence. One morning we found the girls' carvings all missing. the small wooden foxes, gone from every place she'd left them, every hollow, every moss bed, every fire ring. She hadn't taken them. We knew that instantly. And Max, well, Max didn't collect things, at least, not in the way we understood. But maybe the forest had decided that those small totems had finished their work. That memory could now live deeper in soil, in root, in stone. The girl wasn't sad. She just smiled, looked toward the east, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she sat beside the fire and didn't speak for the rest of the day. Sometimes stillness says more than words ever could. The next night, he came. Not for long, but longer than we expected. He stepped into the fire circle while we were still eating. No sneaking, no silence. He moved like he belonged, like we had finally learned the lesson he came to teach. He stood there in the orange glow, in the scent of stew, in the hum of distant crickets, and he looked at each of us, slowly, one by one. We felt it, the goodbye, not loud, not final, but unmistakable, like the way snow melts when spring doesn't ask permission, like the way a song ends before you realize you've memorized it. He didn't howl, didn't yip, didn't run. He just turned and walked, not north, not south, but into the trees, into the part of the forest where the air grows thick and the sounds become stories and the leaves blur into memory. And we didn't follow, because following would have meant we hadn't learned, and we had learned to watch, to listen, to trust, to love something, even as it leaves. The next morning, a feather lay by the stream, silver again, just like the first one, but this one was different, softer, worn, as if it had traveled a long way to return to us. We didn't touch it. We let the wind carry it into the water, and it floated downstream, disappearing around the bend, carried by a current older than memory. And someone, maybe the boy, maybe the old woman, maybe the wind itself, whispered the name again. Max. Soft, tender, certain. And again, the valley listened. And again, the world remembered. Because names like his, names that come with paw prints and silence and trust, they don't vanish. They echo, in footsteps, in seasons, in the spaces between leaves. And even if he never returned, not visibly, not in fur or tail or eye, he had already done the impossible. He had made us wild again, not feral, not lost, but attentive, gentle, alive, and in that way, he would always be here, in every slow breath, in every flicker of firelight, in every choice to be quiet, not out of fear, but out of listening. We had become more than survivors. We had become keepers of a rhythm too sacred for words, a rhythm shaped by a fox who never asked to be followed, but always led us home. We never marked the day he left. There was no ceremony, no gathering, no final meal shared beneath the trees. It wasn't that we forgot. It's just that he had never arrived with fanfare, so he did not leave with any either. He slipped into absence the same way he had once slipped into presence, gently, slowly, like fog retreating at sunrise, like the last ember cooling in a fire long burned. For days, maybe weeks, we listened harder. We walked quieter. We stood longer in the places he once passed, not hoping to see him, just hoping to feel that ripple, that strange gravity he carried. But the moss stayed still, the grass bent only for wind, the fire circle remained undisturbed. The listening place, once alive with energy and breath, seemed to sigh, not in grief, not in sorrow, just in acceptance, because there is a difference between something that's lost and something that's complete, and Max was never ours to lose. He had always belonged to the spaces between. Over time, we changed, not in ways you could always see, but in the way we were. We moved slower now, not because we were tired, but because we were watching. Every step was a question, every breath a choice. We didn't step over stones, we stepped around them. We didn't speak first when entering the woods. We listened. The children, grown now, taught the new ones how to wait, how to recognize silence, how to feel presence without proof. Max had raised a generation without ever saying a word. The girl who once carved the wooden foxes now made them of clay. She would press her thumb into the soft earth, shape the tail with a twist of her wrist, and leave them half buried under roots or tucked into ridges of bark. They weren't for display. They weren't for keeping. They were for remembering. One day she said, not to anyone in particular, "They're not him. They're the places he touched." And we understood. We had long since stopped asking where he had gone. That was never the right question, because Max was not a destination. He was the movement. He was the reason we left the glacier. He was the reason we survived the hunger. He was the pause in the forest that asked, "Are you listening?" And we were, even now, especially now. Seasons passed, not with cruelty, not with hardship, but gently, with rhythm. The fruit trees bloomed, rested, bloomed again. The deer left, returned, left again. Children were born, elders passed on. We lit fires. We told stories. We carried water down the same paths we'd walked for years. Only now, we noticed the way the stones had shifted. There was one stone, near the water, that everyone stepped over, not around, over. Always. It wasn't large, wasn't beautiful, just familiar. One day, a child asked why, and none of us had an answer, until one of the older boys, now a man, but still Max's student at heart, said, because he once stood there, and that was enough. That was more than enough. We didn't build monuments. We didn't name a tree after him. We didn't wear his fur. Max was never a symbol to be tamed. He was a question left open, a lesson without an ending, a song that hummed long after the voice had stopped singing. He was perhaps most of all, a beginning, and when something begins inside you, when it opens a door you didn't know was there, you don't need to hold it, you just need to walk through. One evening, much later in the years that came after the fire rings had faded, and the children had grown older than their parents had ever hoped, we heard something, not a voice, not a footstep, but a rhythm, a presence. It moved past the river, through the trees, along the ridge, just a flicker, just a breath, and for a moment, we didn't look up. Not because we weren't curious, but because we knew. The body forgets many things, but it does not forget Max. And when the air moved in that way, when the fire shifted for no reason, when the night felt suddenly aware, we smiled, and we whispered, into the dark, into the stillness, into the wind that once carried our survival, thank you, not for coming, not for staying, but for showing us the way. And then we said no more, because words were never how he spoke to us. We listened instead, listened to the fire crackle, to the trees creak, to the stream push tiny stones in its path, to the silence that wasn't empty. And the silence said back, I'm still here. In the end, if such a thing exists, Max didn't vanish. He dissolved into every path we took gently, into every choice made with patience, into every breath taken beneath open sky. His fur may no longer be seen, his footprints may no longer be found, but the way he moved through the world, that remained, and we carried that with us, in how we built our shelters, low, curved, respectful, in how we taught our children, not with rules, but with rhythm, in how we told stories, slowly, with pauses, with room for silence between each memory. We carried him in the way we sat before the fire, in the way we sat with stillness, not to be alone, but to be present. Max was never just a fox. He was the shape of survival, made graceful. The silence that taught us how to begin again. The answer to a question we forgot we had asked. And now, forever woven into the wild he helped us hear. He became not memory, but rhythm. Not legend, but lineage. Not story, but spirit. And spirit, true spirit, doesn't leave. It lingers. It listens. It becomes the land itself. And so, when the fire dies low, when the valley holds its breath, when the world is quiet enough to hear the sound of paws you cannot see, we know he's here, always, just ahead of us, just beyond the trees, where the wild things wait for the ones who remember how to listen.